Saturday morning on BBC Two, getting cosy and Christmassy.
The question is, are you ready yet? Because Christmas is here. You know Christmas, it's the season of rushing around like mad trying to get ready, then all of a sudden, in the pull of a cracker, it's all over. Whether you're a festive fanatic or a bit of a Scrooge, when you look back, you soon see that your Christmases have been massive markers in your life.
I'm Adrian Chiles, and this year, ho ho ho, all through Advent I'll be meeting some very well-known faces.
Season's greetings.
And the same to
What
you.
a pleasure.
Yeah. Look who's here.
Congratulations and everything.
Thank you very much.
To find out what Christmas means to them,
The Christmas story makes me very emotional.
There is something really neighbory about Christmas. I've never ever had that before.
how they celebrate,
The whole thing was filled with everything you could ever need.
You knew Christmas was coming when the George Michael hamper arrived.
And 3 and
why their traditions are so important to them.
I love the idea of a house absolutely full of people.
Christmas is the time we come together.
And how they handle the ups and downs of the festive season.
When I look back, I'm always surprised how my mum and dad even gave us Christmas. I caught my mum crying because she couldn't afford to put food on the table.
Those were difficult times for me. Such a lot of death and destruction.
To see them happy and smiling, that makes me very emotional and happy.
Merry Christmas.
Oh, Merry Christmas to you.
Join me to discover how Christmas has shaped their lives and how their lives have been shaped by Christmas.
The man whose Christmas memories we're unwrapping today is actually a bit of a hero of mine, a giant of broadcasting, a journalist who's been bringing the big, bad, wide world into our homes for more than 50 years now.
I can hear every now and then somebody having a crack at the wall with a hammer. They're trying to bash it down with their bare hands almost.
I'm talking about the BBC's World Affairs editor, the writer and broadcaster, John Simpson. Now, I'd go an awful long way to spend some time with John, but as luck would have it, I find him closer to home in a pub in Chelsea. John, what
Adrian.
a Christmas present this is for me,
Oh, me
to
too.
be able
It's
to
a real
spend some time
pleasure.
with you.
Well, it's lovely.
This pub, you've spent a Christmas or two in here, have you?
Well, I just used to live within staggering distance of here, about 100 yards away. This was everything. This was my office, my writing room. It's very special to me, this place, actually. I really, really like it.
I don't know whether you've ventured upstairs, but we've effected a transformation for you, a kind of a special Christmas setting. We'll head up there. You'll like it, I think.
Will I?
Yes. Well, I don't know. Just pretend to. It is Christmas, after all.
John, 79 now, is still reporting on news events from around the world. I'm hoping today this chance to reflect on all his Christmases gone by will be a welcome break.
Gosh, this is beautiful.
Just to get ourselves in that
In the mood.
in the mood.
Yes.
Yes.
Ah,
Okay. You comfortable?
very comfortable.
Then we'll begin. What's a typical Christmas look like at the moment?
It's not unlike this, really. I like to have big Christmases. I like to have lots of people around. So that's what we usually do. And I like, my favourite thing is to have it at home where everybody comes and stays a couple of nights. That I love the idea of a house absolutely full of people. I haven't always been like this, but
No.
I'm now.
Who does the cooking for these big family feasts that you enjoy?
My wife and her sister do most of it, and
You've got a more supervisory role then, would you say?
if supervisory means sitting in the next room watching television, that's my role.
Okay.
Somebody
All right.
has to do it.
And why not?
John was born on August the 9th, 1944, to Joyce and Roy. His parents had expected the new arrival to join his two half-siblings in their family home in London. But for the first And not the last time in John's life, war played its part, even in the story of his birth.
So just going back to your childhood, I mean, we're sitting here in Chelsea now, but you were born a long way from here, weren't you, in Lancashire? How was that?
Thanks to Adolf Hitler, actually, who decided to send a missile, a V-1 missile, to hit the house 3 doors down. My father was back on leave from the
And this was
army.
in London?
This was in London. And they were wakened up at 5 in the morning with the ceiling coming down. And my father took my mother to King's Cross Station, put his hand in his pocket, pulled out as much change as he had, said to the desk guy, give her a ticket to wherever this takes her. And this took her to Blackpool. Then she had me in the Queen's Hydro in Cleveland, and then brought me back to London about 10 days later. So my Lancashire experience was pretty small.
I mean, it's tenuous, but it's significant, isn't it?
It's on my passport.
Yeah.
Everywhere I go, people say cleverlies.
So what's your first memories of Christmas then? You're back in London, immediate post-war years. We think of them as very frugal years. Have you got memories?
Yeah, it was quite frugal. My poor old dad didn't have any money much, and yeah, it was frugal. An orange in my stocking, and that's about it really. And some nuts. He used to make sure, my mother and he used to make sure I had some nuts to eat, and just whatever small toy they could get. And it wasn't easy in those early days after the war.
But you had some feeling of Christmas joy there.
Oh yeah, and they did make it special with a tree and everything. No, it was lovely. We really didn't have very much money, but the money that we had, they looked after me. I mean, I was very lucky to have them.
Happy family times, but everything was about to change.
Now they split up. I don't think they divorced, did they? But you were very young when they.
I was 6 when they split up. Yeah, and my father was a very difficult man, lovely man. I really miss him terribly. Still 40 years after he died, but he was difficult to live with, and he had to have everything his own way, and my mum couldn't take it any longer. And one day, my father took me to the Festival of Britain in 1951, and we came home that evening, and there she was sitting on the stairs, bottle green coat and a hat with a feather sticking up out of it, I remember, and a suitcase packed saying, "I'm leaving and the boy's coming with me." And my dad then said, I think really just to kind of break the flow, said, well, you know, what about him? What does he want? And they both looked round at me. And I thought, in that way that kids do, the sort of weird logic of kids, I thought, well, my mother, who was whose first husband had died during the war, at the beginning of the war, she's got 2 kids. My father doesn't have any kids. So, you know, it's a bit of balance. I thought I'd better stay with my dad. And he threw himself into looking after me and bringing me up. And I think, I mean, whatever you may think of me, I think he did quite a good job.
Was your mum in the picture at all then? Did
Not
you have
really.
any contact with her?
Not really. I mean, I did see her occasionally, and we wrote to each other. But no, I mean, it's one of the great regrets of my life that I didn't see her more often.
John's father, struggling to earn a living as a property developer, was now solely responsible for 6-year-old John.
I mean, you're essentially an only child in this marriage, and then you're an only child with a single parent. And I suppose you didn't know a lot different. What are your feelings on that experience?
Well, you know, I think it probably left me with a kind of need of something. I mean, I don't think my father was able to give me absolutely all the love and affection that a mother would have, but he was very affectionate and he was very generous and nice to me. And it made me into an outsider. That's definitely true, because, you know, the most likely thing people would have, if they only had one parent, it'd be a mother, because dad would have died in the war. So it really was unusual just to have a dad. And I used to kind of have to invent a mother. I sometimes think I must have sounded like Marcel Proust, always talking about my mother and going on just to try and persuade everybody that I had one. I was a lonely kid because my dad had to work and there wasn't anybody else at home. And I learned to be very self-sufficient. I learned we lived in quite an area that was quite a rough area in those days. And I used to come home from my little private school wearing a bright purple blazer. I mean, you can't imagine anything more likely to stir up the local kids. And I used to have to avoid the local kids who sometimes attacked me, grabbed me, threw things at me. And I just learned how to cope with those things. And I've often, you know, even now, I mean, I go to difficult places, I often kind of, I think, put into practice the lessons that I learned as a 9-year-old kid in a bright purple blazer in an area which didn't like kids in purple blazers.
Did your family have any faith? Was your mum religious? Was your dad religious?
My mum wasn't at all, in fact, really quite sort of anti-religion. My father was a Christian Scientist. It's a religion where your mind heals you and where your understanding of God permeates everything in your life. And he loved the idea that you didn't need to go to doctors.
The Christian Science movement began in the American city of Boston in the 1870s and expanded, even flourished in the UK at the start of the 20th century. Centred around spiritual prayer-based healing, it drew some followers away from Catholicism and the Church of England. But many have criticised its rejection of modern medicine.
I was brought up with it and I stayed with it for quite a long time. I've still got an affection for it, but I mean, I'm not a long ceased to be a Christian Scientist. But I do, you know, I can see its philosophical points. And that's where I learned a sort of fundamental love of the Christian story, actually, which I still have. I do really like the Christmas story. I love the idea. Makes me very emotional. It's like why I like Once in Royal David's City. It's because you know, the idea of a poor family that can't find anywhere to live, to stay the night, for the wife to have the baby. I mean, I find that very moving, you know. That's interesting. And real somehow, not, you know, you could see it probably happened like that.
You didn't have much money, but you were getting scholarships into these fancy schools.
If you are the son of a poor man, and my father was pretty poor, you do feel the need to do well and to get the kind of scholarships and things that were necessary. Can I show you something?
Yeah, please do.
I was at St. Paul's School.
Yeah.
And if you were a scholar at St. Paul's School, they had a little silver fish. And I know it sounds balmy. It came from the Bible when the miraculous draft of fishes, and there were 153 scholars. So I still keep my little fish.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Despite all the stuff I've lost, you know. But
there's not many times I've had a fella say, "Can I show you something?" and starts unbuttoning the shirt. By 1955, when John was 11, his father's property developing work had become more lucrative. Roy, together with a business partner, bought a large rundown house in Suffolk. Once it was fixed up, it became a favourite school holiday destination for father and son.
As a teenager, then, what were your memories of Christmas? It was just you and your dad. Where would you spend it?
We used to spend it in the local pub in Dunwich. This place on the cliff top. Lovely old-fashioned pub, and they did a Christmas dinner. My dad used to take us there. I mean, I still remember that as some of the most enjoyable times. My father was very funny, very, very witty, and just a great person to be with. And when things were going well, they didn't always go well, but when they did, there was nothing like being with him in a pleasant atmosphere, you know. And the Christmas trees always rather remind me of those Christmases. Just him and me, that's all.
John completed his school education with a love of English and went on to read the subject at Magdalen College, Cambridge. It was here he discovered his passion for journalism.
So what kind of student were you? Were you diligent, sociable? I mean, you're in the 60s now. Were you doing what everybody apparently was doing in the 60s?
I was a good, assiduous student, but I got involved in student journalism, and that took up most of my time. So I didn't get a very good degree. But by that stage, my dad was so proud of me that it didn't really matter. But I was producing. We had a magazine at Cambridge called Granter, which used to be the big thing, and I was the editor of that. And it just took huge amounts of my time. I couldn't be bothered with stuff like work. You know?
And you could see the way the wind was blowing. You were going to go into journalism. After you finished,
yes. I didn't have very... I knew I wanted to write. Journalism is a way you can be paid monthly to write. So I suppose that's what But I didn't have any idea of going into the BBC. I didn't have any idea about being a foreign correspondent, though if I had known at the age of 21 or 22, God, I've been so happy.
Really, it's exactly what you would have chosen. You also got a taste for television, or an insight to television, when you were on University Channel.
Yes, that was great. And we did really well for a long time, and then we got booted out. But in the semi-final, I think.
But did you like the look of television?
I loved the whole idea, and I loved the cameras, and not because I like to strut my stuff, but because it gave you a sort of sense that you had to come up with something interesting because the camera was on you. I mean, clearly that's faded now.
Yeah. Yeah.
In 1963, early in his university years, John took his first ever foreign trip to America. The destination, a Christian Science conference. The journey there turned out to be extraordinary.
First of all, I ran out of money after about 4 days. I'd been working in a bank for months, and I took £350 with me, which actually...
That's a lot of money.
A lot of money in England at that time, but the exchange rate in America was really bad. And so I spent it all in New York in a matter of 3 or 4 days. So then I had to learn to live on the streets. I begged a little bit. Another fellow wanderer showed me how to go to a transport hub or something like a station or a bus station. And he said to me, "You'll always find money in the telephone booths." And I did. People forgot to pick up their change from a phone call, and you just open the little drawer, and there would be a 5-cent piece, or sometimes, if you were lucky, 2 bits, 25 cents, which was enough for a hamburger and a Coke. But I still had to live rough, so I lived on the streets. I learned how to do it. It was somewhere, it wasn't too bad.
But where were the Christian Scientists then?
I hadn't got there yet.
Oh, right,
I hadn't got to the conference. Then a very sweet family looked after me, but they had a dark secret. It was a brother He worked for the Teamsters Union, but essentially worked for the mafia. He took me right across America in his truck. And during the journey, he started telling me about all the people he'd whacked and how, you know, I mean, it was really quite rough, and he was really racist. I didn't like that. So in the end, I just said, look, just let me off here. Not many 19-year-olds had gone for long journeys with mafia hitmen, you know.
And live to tell the tale. It wasn't just this brush with the mafia that made this trip memorable. He also met Diane, who he went on to marry. So how exactly did you first clap eyes on your wife then at this Christian Science?
I went to Boston. Boston is the kind of mecca of Christian Science. It's where it was founded and everything. And they had a big conference there. And I just met her at a sort of exhibition. And I couldn't take my eyes off her. And very attractive, blonde. You know, I remember a sort of red kind of raincoat thing. You don't forget those moments. She came from Southern California, one of the finest places on earth. I just absolutely fell in love with her.
Was it faith that brought you together, or you were just at these conferences that happened to be about faith?
Yeah, it was more that. I wouldn't have gone to America without the conference.
Do the head honchos at Christian Science know their conferences were being like international dating agents? John's romance with Diane was a whirlwind. She moved to England and the couple married in 1965. He graduated the following year, and after his time on the student paper, he was determined to become a journalist. He secured a job at the BBC as a trainee sub-editor in the radio newsroom.
I didn't like the job at all. It was like being back at school. There were people who were desperate to show you that a university degree wasn't of any use to a true journalist.
In 1970, John and Diane's first child, Julia, was born. A second daughter, Eleanor, came along 2 years later. John and his young family moved to Ireland for his first correspondence job. Northern Ireland was in turmoil. Years of political tension and sporadic violence had deteriorated into the protracted conflict we know as the Troubles.
But I became a foreign correspondent very young. I think the youngest they'd ever had.
At first sight, the story that came out today in court was a bizarre one, involving as it did the IRA, the British Secret Service, and a secret meeting with a British government minister.
We had two little girls by the time we went to Dublin. One had only just been born. I mean, she was born in December, and I think we were in Dublin by February. So it was very gutsy of my wife to have brought us.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Dublin was safer than Belfast, so no doubt about it. And there were shooting there, there were bombs there, but nothing on the scale that there were in Northern Ireland. But our girls were so sweet, and you know, just to see them have a Christmas with them was, of course, you know, just as wonderful as you can imagine.
So, you were in a house in Dublin, and you had this kind of setup.
Yeah. One of the things we absolutely determined was to make it as normal and as consistent as we could possibly do. So we had the same pictures and the same ornaments and things and the same type of Christmas, so that the kids would have a sense of kind of continuity and normality.
I mean, it takes it's a special kind of role, being married to a foreign correspondent. It's a bit like being married to a soldier. You've just got to follow them, you know, wherever they go.
I'm sure it was a disadvantage to her to hop from country to country, but she never complained about that. And we enjoyed ourselves very much. But it was things like Christmas that absolutely nailed down the experience, you know. And I think my daughters could probably, certainly the elder one, can probably remember each Christmas that we had and what it was like and where we had it, because that is one way of keeping a family together. But you're right. I mean, you know, with my daughters, for instance, I would always have warned them not to have a relationship with a foreign correspondent. I mean, it's too difficult. It really is. And I don't think I should have kind of been married, really. I could have found another job for my family's sake, but I didn't. I mean, a bit late now.
To learn more about John, I asked another legend of broadcasting for his memories of that time.
Oh, John Sargent.
John and I became BBC radio news reporters in 1970. John was a natural broadcaster, but outside the studio, he affected the air of a casual amateur. He was charmingly self-deprecating and funny. We soon became friends. Even on dangerous assignments to Northern Ireland, we laughed a lot.
Oh, we did.
When our car was hijacked by the IRA in Londonderry, John coolly demanded that we should take our tape recorders out of the boot before abandoning the vehicle. Beneath this calm exterior, he was already demonstrating the determination, the courage, and the integrity which would lead him to become one of the BBC's greatest correspondents. Happy Christmas, old friend.
Oh, dear John, but he's much too nice. It was just real pleasure to me that John and I, who were already close friends, could have been on that trip together.
The danger then was that thrilling or worrying, or did you start, a moth drawn to the flame?
What became really important to me was to tell people what I was seeing. I haven't sort of put it in these terms to myself or to you before, but that was really it. It's more the job, the duty of telling people what's going on is the most important thing, and making sure that you survive the experience, though very important, is second in the list.
What was the draw?
Well, I wouldn't say there was a draw, Adrian. A lot of people say, oh, you're an adrenaline junkie and all that kind of stuff. It's absolute nonsense. It isn't that. I mean, it's what the job demands of you.
I mean, you were a man at the time of some faith, with Christian Science background.
Declining, I think.
Declining.
That's
okay. And what did seeing all the killing in the name of religion in Northern Ireland, did that hasten its decline in your mind?
Yeah, I suppose it perhaps did a little bit. But really, I quickly grasped what everybody else just about grasped, was that it wasn't really killing in the name of religion. It was killing in the name of tribal kind of loyalty.
But religion was being invoked.
People gather around a flag. And in Northern Ireland, it was Protestantism on one side and Catholicism on the other. But, there was nothing about Catholicism or Protestantism. It was about the fact of one lot of people living amongst another and the mutual antagonism between them. And actually all the decent and good priests and ministers and so on were completely against the killings and the violence. So, I always think you hear a lot of people say, "Oh, religion is responsible for so much of that." I don't think it is religion. I think it's politics.
By the end of the 1970s, the family had moved back to England. As the new decade began, John's professional life saw him interviewing key world figures of the time, like Colonel Gaddafi in Libya in 1979. But back at home, he was facing the death of both of his parents, and his marriage to Diane was coming to an end. The time losing your parents, your first marriage is ending. Where are you? Where's your faith journey here?
I'd sort of finished with any kind of organised religion. I don't think I believed in anything very much, and I was very upset by my dad's death. He was still young. I mean, he was 65 when he died. And that was a hard period. And everything in my life was kind of in the blender, really, and chopped up and churned up. And then my marriage broke up very soon afterwards. And a difficult time. And for a long time, I had absolutely no religion whatsoever.
When your first marriage broke up, I mean, it's just awful, it's just hard.
It is. But I think it was harder on my wife and family than it was on me.
These painful years had taken their toll on both family and faith. By now, John had abandoned his father's Christian Science beliefs. His daughters, now aged 12 and 14, were living with Diane. But despite their separation, John's relationship with his girls has stayed strong.
We've got a message here.
Who can this be from?
Happy Christmas from all of us. I would say our most memorable Christmas spent together was when you took me to Moscow as a teenager for Gorbachev stepping down and basically the end of the Soviet Union. I remember us sort of slipping and sliding around on the snow and ice in -15, with everyone around us saying how temperate and warm it was that year, when obviously it really wasn't. We'd been to Ismailovo Park. They have a lovely market there, and you bought me some lovely things for Christmas, which I still have and love. Aww. And actual Christmas, after you'd done your reporting, we went to one of your colleagues, and it was very festive and fun and exciting. Yeah, it was really lovely. So, hope to see you soon. Take care, love you, bye.
That's lovely. Gosh. My daughters have turned out to be lovely women, and they're very, very sweet to me. I mean, I love their company, and that hasn't changed. So, I'm very lucky.
Good evening. A superpower weapon to match the threat from a superpower aggressor. That's how the government describes the Trident II missile system it's buying from the Americans. The intention is to give Britain an...
After a brief stint safely behind the desk at the 9 o'clock news, it wasn't long before John's appetite to report, not present the news, took him back into the world's war zones. But in 1982, the dangers facing a reporter on the front line became all too real for John.
I went to Lebanon, where the Israelis were invading, and
which by all accounts was... all wars are ghastly, but there weren't many ghastlier than this one.
No, that's right. This was one of the worst. And massacres, deaths all around, the constant feeling that you were going to be killed. It's the first time in my life that I found myself doing what soldiers have to do, which is to say to yourself, I'm not going to survive this, so I might as well give it my best shot. And I mean, indeed, I came very, very close to death 3 or 4 times.
In what circumstances?
Well, for instance, doing a piece to camera like this outside, and watching the cameraman's face as he stops looking through the eyepiece and just looks at me, and he can see what I can't see, which is that 3 mortar shells are landing right behind me. One about 20 yards away, one about 10 yards away, and the third one right behind me. And not one of them exploded. I mean, the odds against that are pretty
But you can't forget the look in his eye.
No. And I remember he gave me that we had tapes, cassettes, and he wrote on it, "Simpson has a lucky day." And, that was only one example. How quickly you get used to wild violence. We had a bedroom in our hotel where we edited our pictures. And on the way to it, down a corridor, there was a window. And somebody, I don't know how far away, had a sniper, had a bead on the window. And if you walked past it, you were dead. And so, you know, I'd be like with you, we'd be walking down the corridor, talking about whatever it was we were talking about, and then you see the window coming out, you go on your hands and knees.
Because you see the light from the
Oh
side
yeah,
by side
the red.
And you happen to spot it, so you get on your hands and knees.
Yeah, you
along,
just go on, and without
carry
even.
on.
I mean, it's so weird. Then the next thing you're down in the bar and having a drink, or you know, getting in your car, driving. Somewhere.
Can't be good for you.
Well, it probably isn't, but it's worse if it hits you. Of course.
Were you ever caught or captured or kidnapped? I mean, that must have been a constant, particularly in Beirut.
In Beirut. Yeah, I was captured, tortured, not horribly, not life-changingly.
Torture's torture.
Torture is torture. And what really upset me was that I realised I'd tell them anything. You know, I wouldn't, perhaps I do hope I wouldn't tell them anything about people who are close to me, but I was, you know, it was on the edge to do that, and I have felt really, really bad about that ever since. Now I've written about it and talked about it openly, I don't feel so bad. I mean, I feel I've kind of coped with it.
Having survived mortar shells, snipers and torture, John was made World Affairs editor. And in 1989, a momentous year for World Affairs, John bore witness to several seismic events. From China's Tiananmen Square in June.
The army has the power to do something about this, to clear this entire place if it chooses to. The only question is, does it choose to?
To November in Germany for the fall of the Berlin Wall.
It's quite extraordinary. There's chanting, there's singing, there's fireworks going off. I can hear every now and then somebody having a crack at the wall with a hammer. They're trying to bash it down with their bare hands almost.
Then we had, next question, was Romania under Ceausescu gonna go? And yes, it did. And I was, again, able to be there for that. Solely, really, because of my kind of status. You know, a few years earlier, that wouldn't have happened. Nowadays, good luck. I'll be watching it on television at home.
By December '89, John was in Romania covering the revolution that ended 42 years of communist rule under Nicolae Ceausescu.
There's been such hatred in Romania of the Ceausescu tyranny that in fact the reaction here has been primarily one of delight at the news of his death.
Didn't Ceausescu meet his end on Christmas Day?
He did. News wasn't announced until about 20 minutes before we went on air. And I'd been in Ceausescu's office. We managed to get in and film in his office that afternoon. And his secretary gave me his fountain pen. Why, I don't know. Anyway, so we did our editing, edited our report. And 20 minutes before we went on air, live, they announced Ceausescu's been shot. So I had a script to write, and I dashed it off, you know, Ceausescu, writing his obituary, but virtually, and I delivered it to camera.
You weren't writing it in his fountain pen?
I wrote it in his fountain pen, and it was only afterwards. When I put the cap on, I thought, you know, whose is this? I thought, God, it's Ceausescu. I've written his obituary.
That's a hell of a Christmas
That's
present.
a hell of a crew, but who's going to write my obituary? Yeah. You can.
Okay, well, leave it with me. I'll be certainly happy to oblige. But at that moment, you could do that. Or you could be, you know, warming your chestnuts by the fire after a long Christmas lunch, you know.
No question, which I'd rather.
Yeah, you didn't want to miss that one.
Didn't want to miss that one. Really, really didn't. I wouldn't have missed any of that. Can I boast here? I'm sorry, and you've only got my word for it.
You've kind of peaked with writing Ceausescu's obituary with his own fountain pen, to be honest. I don't know where you can take it from here. Go on.
Well, I was the only journalist on earth to cover all of those different things. I'm really glad. And if it meant missing the chestnuts on Christmas Day, you know.
God, what a thing. I mean, going into the 90s, you were, in South Africa.
Very early, in February maybe 90, Nelson Mandela was released.
There can't be many people up there on the balcony or down here in the crowd who could have expected that all this would happen peacefully.
For me, I'd been in South Africa at the height of apartheid, 76, 77, 78, and to see it all come tumbling down with the release of Mandela was just wonderful. And the election there, which brought Mandela to power, was just, I think, well, certainly one of the best, if not the best thing I've ever seen. And Mandela was so lovely. I talked to him a lot, interviewed him various times, and at his inauguration, he made it clear that we were to stand right beside him as he was inaugurated. And so he just sort of pointed, and then he turned around to me and to the camera and gave a big wink. That was just, I thought, it's never going to get better than this, and I suppose it hasn't, really.
John's producer at the time was a South African journalist called Dee Kruger. As a member of John's small team covering the story, they had a strong professional relationship, which soon blossomed into something else. You met Dee around this time.
Yeah, well, she was an Afrikaans-speaking woman who was hired by the BBC to fix for us during the whole election period. And she worked with me, and, we fell for each other. And we got married about a year later.
So it wasn't just Nelson Mandela winking at you then? Through his love of this work, John had found love again. And he also started to re-examine his relationship with religion, thanks to an extraordinary political turnaround. There was a moment in your time in South Africa where, your faith, you said, had waned, but then you saw some things happen which gave you cause to doubt your doubts.
Yeah, you're right. In 1994, South Africa seemed to be trembling on the absolute brink of civil war. Gacha Buthelezi was the head of the Inkatha movement, the mostly Zulu movement, which was one of the two sides. He was a strong Anglican. There was a meeting between him and the ANC at which things were said that made Buthelezi just walk out, and he got onto his plane and he flew back towards his home base where he was going to start a civil war. And somewhere or another in the air, he thought, it's not right, not the right thing to do. And so he did the sort of unthinkable, really, for a politician. Told his pilot to turn back, went back, and he said, I'm sorry, let's keep talking. Pretty good. I joked with Tutu, the Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town, that it was an Anglican miracle.
Over his years of reporting, John built strong relationships with many world figures. But no bond was as strong as the ones he formed with his closest colleagues. All the way down the line, you're working in a team. You've alluded to your camera operators before, but you're banging this together. You must have developed some very strong bonds over the years.
Oh, yes. It's one of the finest relationships, professional relationships you can have. The thing is that there are some times, some stories where the relationship is absolutely essential, where unless you've got a very good and very trusting relationship, you'll fail altogether. I remember one time during the siege of Sarajevo, driving out with my cameraman, South African close friend of mine, a great big giant of a man, and my fault entirely. We came to a fork in the road. I said, let's go left. I should have said, let's go right. Left took us into a really nasty battle where the Serbs were using phosphorus grenades. Now, you know, if you get that in your lungs, you burn for 7 hours internally. I mean, it's the most filthy weapon. They were lobbing these shells over right close to us, and instead of saying to me, it's all your fault, and there are people that do, you know, will do that, understandably, maybe. Nigel just laughed. Each time one of the shells landed, he just took a great laugh. Oh, there goes another one, you know, and he's filming. And you'd do anything for somebody that behaves like that, you know, that doesn't nag at you for your mistakes.
Yeah, you're going to like this then. It's almost like we've organised this beforehand, but...
Oh, there he is.
How's it, John? Happy Christmas. You know, whenever the desk got hold of me and let me know you were planning a shoot, I'd grab it with both hands and pack my passport. There was sure to be a few miles travelled and also a dash of absolute terror, but the gallows humour normally took the sting out of that. Anyway, when we got on location, the nice thing was, no matter who we spoke to, whether it was an AIDS victim in Zim, Fidel Castro, or a warlord with twitchy bodyguards, you treat them with respect, put them at their ease, and begin the interview. They would relax, we'd get the story in the can, and we go home. Result. I like that. Happy Christmas, mate. And this is the wrong side of a lens for a cameraman.
Oh, dear old Nigel.
I mean, what is missed out? I mean, I don't doubt your charm for a moment, as he said, but it doesn't half help. You've got a huge South African bear standing next to you in the shape of Nigel Bateson.
People don't mess around with you. Well, at least they make sure they're in pairs or threes.
In 30 years reporting from war zones around the world, John faced many dangers. But it was in April 2003, while reporting on the US invasion of Iraq, that he came closer than ever to death. John and his small team were travelling in a convoy of Kurdish troops and US Special Forces towards the city of Mosul when disaster struck in the form of an awful friendly fire incident.
We reached a crossroads. Then, out of the blue, the American plane attacked.
An American Air Force plane bombed me and my group. 18 people died, almost all of them burned to death. I had to be the one that went and looked at all the bodies to see whether any of our colleagues were there. I and my immediate colleagues had the most amazing escape, but my poor translator died. I mean, a lovely boy, the only financial support of his large family. Why should he be taken? I found it so hard to deal with that.
But in spite of everything we could do for him, Kamran Abdul Razak died soon afterwards. He was 25 years old.
I keep that kid's photograph with me. It'll be by my bed tonight. And I just think, well, you know, the one duty I can perform is not to forget him.
When John returned home, he kept in contact with Cameron's family. He struggled to deal with his own feelings of trauma and loss, led him to his local church in Chelsea and a vicar called Peter Elvey.
Nice spot.
Oh, lovely. I love it. Absolutely love it.
How far do you go back with this church, then?
I came here first because I like the building and I like the history. But then, you know, those were difficult times for me in all sorts of ways. Going to all these wars and seeing such a lot of death and destruction, I needed a place that I could just be at peace in. I couldn't get over, I mean, you know, I suppose partly survivor guilt, the fact that my entire team's lives, including mine, saved by a kind of miracle. I mean, I was only as far away as we are from that window from a 1,000-pound bomb, and yet I survived it. This poor kid who had only come with us because he'd seen me on television, he wanted to work with me, and I'd agreed to let him, and he died. And that was so, you know, to have all those miracles, especially my own, and at the same time, then somebody that the miracle didn't apply to. I talked it over with Peter. He didn't come up with a little sort of Reader's Digest quote that made me feel.
He knew how to listen by the sound
He
of it.
listened, and he knew how to sympathise, and he knew how to give me peace.
He's no longer with us, but you can sort of feel his presence.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
In 2006, with John's daughters now in their 30s, he would become a father again. John and Dee had a baby boy called Rafe.
So when you found out you were going to be a father again, was that a happy surprise? Was that something you were planning?
Well, yeah, of course, it was a delight.
You must have been
61. I was when he was born.
You've had what, 17 more Christmases with a young boy. I mean, that must have been amazing.
Oh, it was lovely. Do you know, there was some woman in the Daily Telegraph wrote some awful thing saying how selfish it was of me to have a child and forecasting all sorts of awful things. In fact, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I'd had the experience of having two daughters, and I knew all the mistakes I'd made, and I was just determined not to make the same sort of mistakes. I still had to carry on. By that stage, the Iraq war was in full flood, and I had to go there every 6 weeks. I'd spend a fortnight in Iraq. I'm not sorry I did it, but certainly very difficult for Dee.
And as Rafe's got older, it's dawned on him what his dad does for a living.
It's very hard when a little boy of 3 or 4 puts his arms across the front door and says, "You don't go, Daddy." That is hard. That's really, really hard. I think after that, he realized I was always going to come back. I was always going to be sensible. So I don't think in the last sort of 10 years or anything, he's had the same amount of stress, but it must have been difficult for him as a little kid.
Where are you in terms of your faith now, then?
Well, I believe in God. I don't know what God is. I mean, I'd rather like, the 17th century Dutch Jewish philosopher Spinoza used to talk about Deus sive natura, God, or that's to say nature. And I think of God as a kind of principle rather than certainly not as a sort of figure with a beard. That isn't my idea of what God is. It's a principles of love and truth and life and just the sort of right qualities. I don't know whether I'm kidding myself, but that is what I believe.
You've eased off a little bit now. I've heard you've actually taken the odd holiday even, which seems extraordinary, and you're not working at Christmas. So.
Yes. Trouble sometimes follows me.
No, trouble always follows you. I think we've established this.
Well, we went a few Christmases ago, my wife and son and I went to Thailand. Thought we'd have a nice Christmas holiday, and some whopping great violent tropical storm came to the very place in Thailand where we were staying. I really didn't follow it. It followed me. The only equipment was a iPhone, and Rafe had a torch. And we went out, and the sea was sort of thrashing around, the wind was going crazy. And I did a piece to camera looking into the camera, all, you know, everything going on around me.
No one really knows what's going to be happening here in the next few hours. The weather seems to be changing all the time. The rain, which was drenching just a few minutes ago, has suddenly stopped, but the wind has come up pretty fiercely.
I think it gave Rafe just a small taste of what it's like. It can be difficult, it can be dangerous, it can be nasty, but it can also be great fun.
So with your work now, I mean, you're 79. What, you're going into your possibly your 80th Christmas now, is it? Is your appetite?
Hope so.
Is your appetite?
Do you know anything I don't?
No. I was just trying to get the counting right. Not doubting you weren't going to make Christmas Day. Don't get me wrong. But you still got the appetite to work. You still keep working, keep writing, keep travelling.
Yeah, I like doing it. I do this program of mine called Unspun World, which I dearly love. And I think and I've so far managed to persuade everybody that you add to your credibility by continuing to go to places like Lebanon, like Ukraine, because, you know, it does affect the way you report. It makes you clearer in your mind about what's really going on. So I'm happy to do that. I've got a plan to go to the Amazon to revisit an indigenous tribe there called the Ashaninka, which I might just, if I'm lucky, be able to manage it. It'll be difficult, but I'm hoping to be able to do it.
So we thought we should get you something for Christmas. What do you get to the man who's been everywhere, experienced everything? Well, the short answer is not very much, but the thought counts and you are going to love it. Okay? But you'll have to follow me.
Okay.
So I can show you. A little bird told me about John's favourite Christmas carol. So I arranged a special performance for him by two choristers at the church that's meant so much to him over the years.
Once in the royal David city stood a lowly cattle shed, where a mother laid her baby in a manger for his bed. Mary was that mother, Jesus Christ, her little child.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. You know, it's my favourite Christmas carol. Thank you so much.